Thank you, Eve. So my talk is entitled Travelogue for obvious reasons, I think, because the talk will be about me traveling through many different spaces and many different dimensions, in digital space, analog space, and so on. And so the talk actually documents my work with digital media over the last 40 years or so. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt, okay? My talk first tries to create a context for my work, for what I do. We'll talk about some early work about AI, because I've been working in an art science environment, and AI is definitely one of the key issues, the key fields of interest and sources of inspiration is artificial intelligence, and then I will try to sketch the transition towards what we call artificial life today, talk a bit about interaction, and document some recent work, and then finally we'll come up with a conclusion and have some time for discussion. So if we talk about context, we usually come up with a list, but I decided today to develop some context with pictures. And if we talk about contemporary art is something, or a kind of field of reference. A field of reference. And these are a few of my, artists that I really like. The futurist people: Robert Ryman, Matthew Barney, Marcel Duchamp, Gerard Richterban, Bruce Nauman, Mark Rothko, Georges Seurat, Cy Twombly, and so on. So this is my field of interest. It has absolutely nothing to do with digital media, but at least it is the way I have been approaching art. And of course, this is just a selection. So today the talk is about art science. So this is my art reference. This could be my science reference. So, of course, we need Alan Turing, for sure. Nicolas Tinberger, we need von Neumann. Of course, there is also Ilya Prigozhin, Marvin Minsky, one of the key figures in AI. And cybernetics. Cybernetics has been very important in the early days of what we used to call computer art, for instance, in the UK, with the work by Gordon Pask and Edward Inadovich and so on. I won't talk about that. This is just a brief sketch with the question, how many dimensions do we have? Because normally, or simply speaking, we normally try to approach complexity by having a linear list of options. But really, the dimensions in art and science are infinite. We don't know how many dimensions there are. And the only thing we can really try to sketch, is to come up with what I call a floating network. A floating network of references and the network will help us to organize our search space, and finally come up with an instrumental means to develop an approach to identity. Identity in terms of art and science. And of course the question is there any difference at all? Some early work had to do with developing new musical instruments, and in particular developing ways to connect the body to electricity, because that was the key notion with the Crackle Box project that I developed with Michel Weisfis at the time. And so these are really electronic circuits that are touched. The instrument is played by touching the electronic circuitry. So the body becomes part of the system and results in very complex sounds and a very complex control structure. A bit later, I got interested in because my background really at the beginning was electronic music and live performance, and at the time there were no laptops, so the only option really was to develop hardware. and to take it on the road. And this is a machine I developed in the mid-70s. It's a hybrid computer, really. Half of it is analog and half is digital. And the idea was to use it to analyze the human voice, and then to come up to use that analysis in order to control or to influence digital circuitry. Because this is one of the very first instances where I developed a project using what I call the principle of influence. I have no intention to control anything at all. The only real option is to develop a machine that displays or exhibits a certain behavior by itself, and then it can only be influenced, but it cannot be controlled. So this principle is still very much alive today. More early work at the Planck in Brussels, 79. One of the very first networked computers, 5 PET Commodore computers with a 1-bit network. So here the one idea here is distribution, to have not just one computer, but it's an agency, what we would call an agency of 5 machines, and they are interconnected, so they have to collaborate in order to solve the problem successfully. And of course today in artificial life we talk about distribution, and there are many examples around here in the exhibition of distributed computing, where you have a system that consists of a number of original or individual entities, computers, people, actors, agents, we would call them, and they interact by simple local interactions, and from these simple local social interactions, maybe, we get global emergent functionality or complexity, and so on. And this is a very early example. These machines were borrowed from a shop in Brussels, and the program was in assembler, 6502 machine code, in order to have a very fast kind of computer animation display in real time. At a certain point I got interested in randomness, and this is controlled randomness. It's a series of 4 drawings, because there are 2 parameters, so there are 2 exponent 2, which is 4 different individual instances of this algorithm. And you can see there is just an incomplete square that has 4 different manifestations. And so you can see this is a single word consisting of 4 sheets of paper, and together they kind of form a single unified statement. Later work in 1980s. Sure.
With what machine were
These were realized on what was called a Hewlett-Packard desktop computer. A very simple, it was 16K memory. It has a single alphanumeric display, so you could see the program one line at a time. But it had an A3, mostly HP, mostly plotter, flatbed plotter. So I was very happy. And at the time, of course, there were only blue inked pens. It was blue ink or nothing at all. There was no choice. And okay. So these are very early examples of what today I call this social computing, because they are instances of attraction and repulsion within a simple, basic, abstract society. And here there are only 2 different actors, 2 entities or organisms, whatever you want to call them, and they are attracted and there is repulsion. And this is 3 instances of the same program, and the behavior is very different. This is about behavior. It's not about structure. I was very interested I've always been interested in psychology, in human psychology, and also what I call machine psychology. How you can actually create abstract models of human psychology in simplified models of human psychology inside machines and play with these components and see what the aesthetic potential is of these abstract thoughts. And so there are, of course, also dynamical systems, because they are nonlinear, so they can escalate. And these are simply 3 small drawings of the early 80s. More work with conditional randomness. So 4 drawings actually make up a single work of art. More early drawings, these are bigger drawings, where I started a series of what I call sketches, or algorithmic sketches. And there are many, many different programs that I developed over the years. And this is one of the early versions, where there is a certain invisible kind of frame, a skeleton is computed algorithmically, and then there is a contouring algorithm that, these contours, it creates kind of a body around the skeleton. And so what we get from this is kind of organic looking structures. And they are not really anticipated with computing at all. These were done on an Atari computer and programmed in Mac 2, because at the time, of course, it was not, even in the early 1980s or 90s, it was not simple to, not always simple to have access to the right hardware, the right software. And this was Mach 2, which was a wonderful Fort-based programming language called Fort. And it was interactive and using an interpreter and so on. And I was using Atari because I had a connection with Atari and so on. Anyway, this is another example. Then I got interested in grammars, and I read a book on Chomsky and many other books and papers, and in particular the abstract idea that if you have a limited vocabulary, you can create an infinite number of instances with this, based on this limited, finite number of vocabulary. And these are all small drawings created using grammars. At a certain point, there was kind of a switch, because I was working in the abstract. I was working what we call, this was in the procedural approach. So I was not really interested to create final statements. I was more kind of interested in, as I said, in behavior, and to probe myself, so to speak. What I was doing was to invent all sorts of conceptual machinery and then implement it in a computer program. And then, so the program would kind of perform, expose itself. So in other words, the behavior implied in the program would document itself. So I had kind of a residue, behavioral residue in the program. But these were all abstract ideas, and at a certain point, like this one, you get a kind of certain graphic identity, a graphic identity that kind of is implied in the rules of the program. And at a certain point, I had the idea to switch to a more singular orientation, in the sense that I got interested in implementing aspects of human creativity in computer programs. And one of the very first ones was this one. So this is what we call an expert system. It's not a traditional expert system. It's not because expert systems normally in the field of AI are programs developed by experts. They represent or contain expert knowledge, knowledge that is, readily available to be implemented in rules. But I was not in that orientation at all. I was kind of programming blindly and using my intuition rather than my knowledge in order to probe my belief system, as I call it, in order to come up with, to gradually develop a program that would kind of display certain aspects of what I am, my identity as an artist. So I was programming as an act of introspection, as I call it, because if you implement, if you play with programs as a kind of a cognitive building, a toolbox to play with certain concepts and so on, you gradually develop a certain field of reference. And the focus of that reference actually changes according to your search space. And so the title of my speech, by the way, is called Travelogue. So this illustrates the travelogue idea. It's about traveling. It's about traveling your identity, your own, what's called a search space, your belief system. And so this is a residue, and you see it's not just random. There's a certain identity that comes out of that, kind of emerges from this. And so the program is based on a sequential database. This is the very first implementation, 84. So at the beginning, anything goes, and the system will make a certain gesture, and then it knows it has a reference, and then it has to take care of this reference and propagate. So the drawing will actually develop according to a certain trail. It keeps track of its history. And then in the end, the output here was on matrix dot printer, the old times. And then it was photocopied onto watercolor paper, and then color was added by hand. So then, Symbolic list machine, I was very lucky to have access to a very powerful computer, and developed some programs, again, having to do with distribution and having a frame, an invisible framework, and having a contouring algorithm. And the contouring algorithm is not perfect, but that's the way I like it. And it provides a certain identity. Then more later on, this was again done on a Macintosh, early Macintosh computer. Rule-based system with color added by hand. More series, rule-based systems. Again, this is the same program. These are 3 instances of the same program running from the unknown, because there is randomness and there is rules, and we can see that the rules are activated by randomness. It's like having a car. And there is gas in the car. The gas, of course, doesn't determine the car. It makes the engine run. And here, randomness is similar. It makes the engine run. It activates the degrees of freedom in the system. It makes the system propagate into a certain final state of mind, so to speak, because the drawing, the algorithm goes on until a certain percentage of the drawing is completed. So it stops by itself. It has a sense of what it does.
Can you give an example of such a rule?
An example of a rule, yeah. First of all, I have to say that these drawings are also an example of the skeleton approach. There is an invisible kind of framework, and there are like here, these are contouring algorithms, but the contouring algorithms are not very they are not 100% correct. There are certain uncertainties and problems with them, but that's the way I like it. And it's not just a single rule; it's a family of rules, right? And one rule could say, well, make a certain line of a certain, or make a frame of a certain branching structure, according to certain rules at a certain location. If that location is taken, go somewhere else. If you have a certain big structure somewhere at the center, then again you can create a small structure north of it. You know, rules like that. So the system has a sense of location and size also, but not of complexity in any human sense, in any visible sense, because the program cannot see itself. You see, there are instances, the later examples that I have, where the program can actually see itself. And there are instances of the very, very recent 2014 programs that were created using a robot then the robot can see itself. So it has sensors. It has infrared sensors and sometimes a camera. So I have examples later on. So at a certain point, all these rule-based systems, there are many problems with, first of all, I wanted to continue my story about the expert system because, as I said, rather than using rules in an expert system to do something explicit, I was kind of trying to discover rules that are implicit to myself as an exploratory device rather than as something I know. So anyway, at a certain point there was a shift in AI because there were many problems associated also with rule-based systems, and there were many new discoveries, and AI was looking at nature, and there was a lot going on, and one of the sources of inspiration was this, the Belousov-Sabotinsky reaction. And this was something discovered in the 1920s by two Russian scientists, and they were working on a petri dish, and suddenly there were blue waves that were kind of propagating in this petri dish, and they did not understand what was going on. Of course, it was an example of self-organization. They didn't understand why it is that suddenly millions of molecules decide to collaborate and produce blue waves. So I thought it was very neat, and I decided to use this very principle to create music and to develop a program to create waves, sound waves. And so I thought of having an algorithm that would be distributed, and there would be many harmonics, and these harmonics in the sound would kind of communicate and collaborate to produce an interesting sound. And this was one of the ideas. So it was the start of my work with what we call distributed systems. And this is another example of inspired on an idea that was in the book by Manfred Eigen and Ruthild Winkler. And Eigen was a Nobel Prize winner for, was it chemistry, I think, or physics? I don't remember exactly. But biochemistry. And there was an example with three molecules interacting, so on, and I said, well, this can be just three organisms interacting, and these are the three organisms, the green one, red one, and the yellow one, and they overlap. And here, the hidden logic in this micro-society of agents, as we call them, is that big organisms are strong but very slow, and small organisms are weak but very fast, flexible. So we have kind of conflicting constraints within, and I love conflicting constraints. So I've worked a lot with that, and so this is an early example again where we see some behavior developing from these very simple constraints. I had no means to capture the activity in the system. These are 35 millimeter slides because this was the only way I could, retrieve the image from the computer. And later on, I had the idea to develop systems where myself, as a body, as a a living entity outside of the computer would have the capacity to actually interfere with life inside the machine. And this was a very early example, 86 also, where I was using a glove. It was called it's not a data glove, but a power glove it was called. And it has sensors, and again there was an agency, and of course I was thinking in terms of a musical agency. Again, having a distributed kind of a band, an improvising band, where the musicians living inside the machine, they talk to one another, so they communicate through social affinities, and they move through two-dimensional space, but I can also disturb, I can be present within this artificial society. I can remotely be present in there and again interfere. So it's like a behavioral kind of musical. It's not really a musical instrument, it's a system, because it's not a one-to-one responsive instrument. It's more like again the principle of influence, where you're dealing with a certain intelligence outside of yourself, but still you can exercise some influence. And so we have the idea of what sometimes called collaborative computing, where there is a certain, as I said, a certain intelligence that collaborates with agents inside and outside of the two sides of the screen. Of course, this a power glove is a relatively simple XYZ controller and flex in the fingers. Then I try to develop some instruments. This is a violin developed at the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the VUB, 86, 87. And this has, the instrument has infrared sensors inside the strings and also inside the bow. So, and then a flat cable that goes to an interface and an Atari computer and so on. So this is a pretty sophisticated control structure to, again, it's not really an instrument in any traditional sense, because the physical activity of the performer is actually captured and then interpreted by a computer program and then mapped onto a MIDI box, a MIDI synthesizer, and it can be very complex. More examples of distributed systems. This system is called Tommy. It's a virtual pinball machine. You know why it's called Tommy? What? No, it's not a movie, no. It's called, you should know, Tommy, no? What? Pete Townsend, The Who? I couldn't resist calling it Tommy because of Pete Townsend. Anyway, it's a virtual pinball machine, and it's a good example of a complex dynamical system because it's a distributed thing, and the kind of thing it explodes, and the explosion is translated into sound. More examples, there are a few, but actually there are a series of drawings next door. These are also drawings that illustrate the principle of emergence very well, because the drawings actually display wonderful examples of emergence, as I explained, where you have a number of very simple organisms or agents, whatever you want, or actors, sometimes they're called, and they express a certain social affinity to one another, and also there is a certain threshold of sensitivity. So there are actually two parameters that every actor expresses a certain social affinity towards every other actor. And the key to the complexity here is that the society as a whole aims to minimize social stress in the society. So the agents will move in order to try to minimize social stress in the society. And again, there are certain traces that are left. And sometimes the traces are, circular. Sometimes there is not much going on. Sometimes you get kind of amazing figures that are not designed, so everything you see is emergent. And it's like, it's again, an example of a system that documents itself. Again, exactly the same program, but a different outcome. Now, one can also develop other systems, other relational systems. And this is one instance. It's a program called Nelson. I was invited at the time to participate in a show in South Africa. So I developed the program. Nelson Mandela was still in jail on Robben Island. So I decided to use the colors of the ANC and develop a cellular automaton, it is called, that would model social stress in South Africa. And so my contribution was refused. But anyway, it was fantastic to develop this thing. And other examples of cellular automata. So a cellular automaton, if you don't know, it's a very simple thing. In fact, we have cells. Every dot here is a cell, and every cell has a neighborhood. Okay, and the cell will change according to its neighborhood. There is a rule that is executed. In this particular case, there were two rules: a rule on the left, and a rule on the right, and a rule on the left. And the system develops like this. It moves down, and the rules interpolate. So we get the expression of two rules in a single drawing, or in a single picture. Again, this is not designed. The structure develops from these simple rules. So we have a complexity amplifier, if you wish, because the rules themselves are extremely simple. At some point, I started developing. This is a workbench with linear cellular automata. They grow from top to bottom. And so I was trying to interpret these structures because they grow in time, so it's like music. It develops in time. And I was mapping this to piano roll notation. And also here, this was an early example of genetic algorithms, because genetic algorithms use the principle of natural evolution in artificial settings. And I was viewing the rule. This is the rule. I view this as DNA. So if you view this, if you think of the rule as DNA, you can grab two rules and mix them like crossover, and you can change them, mutation. That's what I do here by selecting two automata and then apply the crossover mutation and then develop the next generation and then propagate through genetic space, the genetic spaces of the cellular automaton in order to create music. I have an example later on. These are interactive cellular automata. Again, this is not really the final version, but just a test version of that program, where you have an automaton that runs by itself and it tries to optimize its cyclic complexity. So it has a kind of a complexity critic inside, but at the same time it's receptive to disturbance from outside. So it has an eye, a simple camera. Again, genetic algorithms used to create drawings, because here what we have is what is so-called L system, Lindenmayer systems. And Lindenmayer systems are is kind of a formal method to describe complex structures in nature, like trees and plants and flowers and so on. It was invented by Aristide Lindenmayer, a Belgian scientist, in the 1950s, 60s. And that's what I did. I was viewing these L systems as nested Lisp structures, in fact, where you can have a collection of these structures and then mix them and so on. And again, this is the kind of drawings that comes out of this, and these are more complex kind of animals that emerge from these relatively simple programs. More drawings, like these are kind of snapshots in genetic space. So what you do, you navigate the landscape or the space implied in the algorithm, and you can take pictures, you can take snapshots from time to time. And these are all very close in 4 instances, very close in genetic space. And you can see that they exhibit kind of a very much related type of complexity. Of course, then again, I couldn't resist of using the very same algorithm to create music and develop a workbench. Swingarm is another approach. If you work with digital media, at some point you realize that still you as an artist, or whatever, as a human being, you actually function and you get motivated by the virtue of having a body. So whatever you do, everything relates to the way you use your body. And that in particular is very important to art, because that's the reason why I make drawings and why painting is fantastic. In painting, since 500 years, since Van Eyck, we still love to paint, because the system of painting is wonderful, because it works, because it relates to the human body. And sometimes I get inspired by facilities or certain capacities, facilities of the human body, and this is called swing arm. And I was thinking of a swinging arm, but then in abstract, and just by having a number of segments, and then you would kind of push the arm, and then the arm would imply a certain space. And I was interested to use this, what is called a physical model, again to create waves, to create sounds. But then in the end, I also created many drawings, which I don't have here. Swing arm was later implemented as to work with, again, with a glove, a data glove. So you would have the virtual arm that would interfere with a physical arm, and then again create sound. In fact, it's a sampler. It's a real-time audio sampler where the arm articulates the samples. Other examples at some point is what I call the semantic approach, is that if you work with pixels all the time, you realize that the pixel is a completely abstract kind of thing. And at some point, just by accident, I stumbled on this collection of wooden blocks. And so these are like pixels, but they have a certain life by themselves. They are not abstract. They tell a certain story. There is a certain history associated with them. So they bring a certain connotation, a certain significance, without any particular, how should I say, without any particular reference. And I was trying to create a reference by, again, specifying certain relationships between these blocks. And then this was an installation project long before processing was available. This was programmed in a Macromedia Director. At the time, it has a Lingo programming facility to create projected audiovisual installations. And so it's really a cellular automaton that continuously reconfigures itself given this collection of blocks. Then also more installations from found materials. Sometimes I call this a found system. Doesn't work? The mic doesn't work? Okay. Okay. Let me see. Yeah, found systems, because from the field of experimental film, we know about found footage, right? And I like to talk about found systems. And I travel quite a lot, so wherever I go, I try to find found systems. And this was a found system that I found in London, just a collection of postcards. And so I developed an installation from that. Again, it's an audiovisual installation inspired on the 1930s film Of Human Bondage. It's the title of the movie. And some older movies. This is also an example of a project called Knockout. It's again a very old movie of the 1930s that I found on a DVD, and then I had a program written that does real-time analysis on the movie while the movie is playing, and that is transformed into sound. So the movie creates its own soundtrack in real time. Now, let's go for a switch. Interaction. A lot of my work has to do with interaction. And interaction is very different from interactive systems. It's very different from responsive systems. So this is what we call an example of interaction, because what we see is two human beings grounded in a common culture, though they understand one another without speaking a single word. And if we would replace one hand by a computer, you think it would work? What do we need in order to have a successful, rewarding human-machine interaction? Let's move on to this. What do we see? We see people communicated in a very profound way, but they're not talking, their eyes are closed. They don't do anything in particular, but yet they are communicating on a very strong, intensive basis, because they are part of the same culture. You can see it from the way they behave. They're very strongly interconnected, so they are interacting in many different dimensions, I think an infinite number of dimensions. And the question is, can we use this as a ground, as a point of reference to create artificial interactive systems? Another example could be this, the human brain. So this is also a massively distributed system. It has 8 billion or so neurons that communicate without thinking about it, pun intended. So why is it that the human brain actually manages to support human consciousness without doing anything in particular in order to synthesize human consciousness? So this is a very strong example and a good model, and this is why I kind of approached the thing in order to develop an interactive music system. And it's an ensemble. It's really a big collection of networks, and so it has if we want an artificial performer, a virtual musician, it needs an ear. So it has to be able to listen. So it needs an ear. It needs a player agency. So it has to be, it should perform. But it needs to be motivated. So it has a motivation generator. And this is original about this thing, in that the human performer actually provides real-time gestures that are accommodated into a certain a memory structure. And that memory structure, in fact, is analyzed. There's a sensor network, adaptive, and so on. But the main thing here is that we need processing functions. We need processing functions in order to produce music. And these, first of all, I have to tell you that the basic implied idea in this system is that the machine performer aims to express its own musical personality, its ego, so to speak, but at the same time it aims to integrate itself into a larger social whole, so it has to balance integration versus expression. Integrate itself in the human suggested context, or on the other hand, just do its own thing. And so these are the two basic drives. And for instance, if the machine wants to express itself, it has to have access to processing functions that help to realize that particular motivation at that instant in time. So it's quite complex. So how do we actually implement this? Well, I used a combination of machine learning and genetic algorithms to implement the system. For instance, this is an example of the ear. It's an ear. It has 16 neurons and 64 sensors. And there is a program that does the wiring of the ear, selects a number of sensors, and then the ear there are 16 potential ears. And so every ear tries to optimize itself. It tries to optimize its sensitivity towards the human performer, because of course the human performer is totally unpredictable, because my frame of reference was actually free jazz. So free improvisation, non-idiomatic improvisation. And so for that reason I couldn't come up with anything pre-programmed, because my intention was not to develop a responsive system, but a truly autonomous an autonomous entity that would be flexible and adaptive, surprising, offer a platform for rewarding human-machine interaction. And so this was the ear. As I said, there are many ears, and so the ears that manage to, the instances of the ears that manage to perform best, that have highest fitness, are then again integrated through crossover and mutation, and so the thing actually propagates in time. And I will speed up a bit, because I developed the notion of relationship, which is inspired on some of work by Luc Steels, who's over there. Relationship, remember? No, for the was it RDL? RDL, Robot Description Language. I think there's a concept of relationship in there. 1980s sometime. And so my version, I developed this. I applied. This concept was, again, a version of that, and I came up with a description of a single motivation. And so there is a single drive, has integration and expression, and it is sensitive to changes in quantity, in quantity, in quality, and similarity. And quantity is a description of the interestingness of what the human performer is doing, the quantity, how strong the stimulus is. And delta similarity simply means the distance between the last statement produced by the performer and the machine. So, for instance, if the motivation is to integrate, then the musical distance has to to get closer, to minimize. If it does not, then the fitness of the function that at that point contributes will be minimal. So the delta similarity is very important. Of course, we don't have the time to go into the details, and I think we have to speed up a bit here. But this is an example because the very first implementation was done in Lisp, Macintosh Common Lisp, and the second one was implemented in SuperCollider. And SuperCollider is it's open source, public domain programming platform. It's based on Smalltalk, and it's really fantastic. I like it very much. And so this is a new implementation. I'll play a little excerpt, very short excerpt. So it's a human performer playing a flute, and then everything else is a computer. Okay, let's move on. This is Project Ali. Ali stands for A Living Interface. Here the idea was to have, again, a collaborative system where there would be a human performer creating a sketch, and then there would be a program performing a real-time analysis, a style analysis, and then the program would develop an agenda in order to collaborate or contradict the style of the human interactor. Artificial animals, done a lot of work with artificial animals, and now recently with robotic artificial animals. Again, I'm interested here in behavior and having traces left by artificial behavior. The Fingertips project, over the last 10 years or so, I've done a lot of work, interactive work with installations, audiovisual installations. This is an early one. It's called Fingertips. It uses computer vision in order to track minute human gesture, and then having an algorithm that maps these gestures to sound. Molecular collision model, you'll skip that. This is interaction in the battery with the installation which is running there on the right. Again, it's a distributed system. It uses a camera. So again, it's the principle of influence. It's a distributed system where there's quite a substantial family of different rules and affinities, social affinities expressed throughout the society. So what we get is very complex behavior, audiovisual behavior, because there is sonification, real-time sonification. It's actually two programs. One is Java, and there's computer vision and visualization, and then there's SuperCollider, used as a sound server. And then here the blue circle is the centroid of movement of anyone in physical space. Similar. Some projects I done some database-oriented work with surveillance cameras, and I wrote a few programs that tap images from remote servers. And this is the day and night binary system, yes and no, 1 and 0, so day and night. So it's a single word consisting of two photographs of a sequence of images taken through surveillance cameras. More symbolic hand, performance system with a glove with 5 sensors. Trilobit, you know about Trilobit? Trilobit was an animal that lived like 5 million years ago, and it had the capacity to see over 360 degrees. So I created a motorized version of that with 2 cameras that can see over 360 degrees, and there's a big projection that creates an image from the 2 eyes, the coordination between the 2 eyes. Let's have a project that computing with living components. Have time to, takes about 5 minutes. But here the idea is that you have a living agency that has a certain behavior, expresses certain behavior by itself, and at the same time we have again the principle of influence and conditioning. So what I have is an algorithm that, or a system that sends here. So there is a fishbowl with living fish, and there are sensors and activators. And so I was interested in, by conditioning the natural choreography of the fish, by conditioning that behavior using sensors and activators. And there's a collection of policies, as they are called in machine learning, and there are sequences of flashes. And these flashes are sent into the fish, into the bowl, and then the behavior is tracked using the sensor and also using a camera. And according to the amount of change, so the idea here is maximizing the maximization of diversity. So the more the fish change, the better. And so there are a number of policies that develop, and again, the system propagates in order to optimize the policies. And now the complexity of the fish as an image, as a dynamic image, that is analyzed and mapped onto a supercollider patch. And the patch itself is also a nonlinear system. So what we have, I'm interfacing a cultural, a designed audio patch as a complex dynamical system with a natural, biological complex dynamical system. And again, they are interfaced. This is another example of interfacing found system, the harbor of Amsterdam, using surveillance cameras and interfacing that with the harbor of Amsterdam. And this is how images change, the histogram, and that histogram is mapped onto a virtual system. So what we have is an existing hardwired physical dynamical system, a found system that is interfaced with an invented audiovisual complex dynamical system producing sound. More recent drawings, Cellular Automata revisited. Do we have time? How much time do I have? Okay. An example, this is a bit special because it's a workbench that I've been working on. It's a cellular automaton that computes a melody, and then there's a second program that computes the harmony that fits a particular harmony melody. So the melody is segmented, and then according to musical tension, certain chords are attributed to the segments, to the melody. Now, in this example, the harmony and melody are performed by a classical guitar. Just a short example. First minute. This is the installation on the left, the wind chime. So, briefly explained, the wind chime is an audiovisual installation. It's database oriented. It uses 10,000 servers spread around the world, and these servers collect information on the intensity and the direction of the wind at these particular locations in space in the world. And there are 24 stations that are captured simultaneously. So it runs like a sequencer. It goes on like that. And you can see here the red circles is what I call a field. And the field is computed as an interpolation from these 24 different locations in space. Then on top of that, what we have is a particle system. So the basic idea behind this work is that you can have a virtual dust activated by physical wind, because of course the particle system is like virtual dust floating in space, and it is conditioned by physical wind, and then visualized in a large map of the world and updated in real time. And again, it is the principle of influence at play here, because the sound is produced again by a nonlinear supercollider patch. The patch itself doesn't change, but it sounds very chaotic, and so it is a deterministic design, but it has a lot of implied complexity. It's very complex by itself. Now, recent robotic work. Parallax robots, these are modified robots, so I use them to create drawings, and so they are situated robots because they have sensors, and they also have sensors underneath. You can see here, but it has sensors, so if the robot draws a line, it can recognize later on that something has been sketched on a piece of paper before. It has Bluetooth functionality, so these robots can communicate with one another, so they can again collaborate. It's an example of collaborative computing, as I call it. And again, you can see there is a certain identity that can, if you want to have a peek at the drawings, there are room next door. So, art science, this is art science, but I couldn't resist by having a few questions or suggestions or remarks, whatever you want to call it. If we talk about art science, what is the aesthetic potential of art science? And I think there is a discussion, a profound discussion at the moment where bodily concerns are very important. There's a lot of research going on in what we call embodied computing. So there is inbound to the body and outbound from the body. We're moving on to new artificial structures that are perhaps half alive and half synthetic. And one of the things that actually, just 2 years ago, there was a cell of a female body that was engineered into a sperm cell. So, multiple identities, face transplantation, distributed hybrid forms, nanotechnology, introspection and access to local networks. So the idea is that you can have an instrumental system that helps you to discover yourself, your psychological self in terms of introspection. But there is also the link to local and global networks that offer profound new options for who we are, what knowledge is, what political structure is, and so on and so forth. Synthetic molecules. If we have synthetic molecules that integrate perfectly well with biological molecules, we will have new types of bodies that are very different. So we will evolve toward new structures in society in the long run. Many automatas distribute machine cultures, because at this point, if we talk about human culture, we are talking about history and about being motivated through bodily connections, and this is something which is still missing in a lot of machine cultures. But I think that will change, because we will move on to autonomous, truly autonomous machines in a distributed system that will link to global networks, so it will link to global bodies as well, and comes to the final point of having wireless wetware integration into massive global networks. Okay, any questions?
So the mic is here. If you have any question, please.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask if we can see on the wall drawings, and drawings are fixed output from the machines. And do you have something similar with music? Because you just show some sample of music, but did you make something like an album, a collection, something that is fixed out of the machine? Because you show us some machine that perform in real time and things so on, but do you sometimes record and make something that is something outputted, like we can see drawing output?
In music, you mean?
Yeah, in music.
Yeah, I've produced a number of CDs, but also a number of CD-ROMs with music software rather than the music itself. Yeah, occasionally, yeah.
Because it's always real-time things, and also
it is.
Are sometimes a way to push out the problem of what is the final product. I love your drawings because they are something that is just finished at one point. We have something that is there for the 20 next years. But if you just make machine that produce in real time, we will not be able to hear something from the early machines you made. By example,
early machine. That's another. Yeah, that's if you Well, I've done a lot of performances, in particular in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and of course most of that hardware is now long obsolete, and some of the instruments are lost or broken or whatever, and so that's the problem with digital performance art, is it's difficult to keep these pieces up to date, and every 10 years or 20 years or whatever, you have to rewrite them in order to make them work with newer hardware and software, because operating systems change, hardware changes, and so on. So that's what happened with a system called POC that I first wrote in Lisp, and then actually the first was in Ford, and then in Lisp, and then in SuperCollider, and then it goes on. Yeah, it's a problem. But normally what I do is I develop new ideas rather than to tinker with old ones. And in fact, the newest, the most recent performance-oriented work is what I call, again, an example of social computing or social mediation, where you have an algorithm that tries to optimize the social context between two performers in order to offer them a platform to perform maximally speaking. And that again, it uses a machine learning algorithm that tracks body signals, like heartbeat, and so on. It's to create music, yeah.
Another question? Maybe.
Yeah.
So, what is your next work?
Good question. There are so many. As I said, the social mediation project. Been working on that for some time. I have some new ideas, so that's quite important. With Heartbeat, also with there are many versions. One is with Heartbeat, one is with two emotive brainwave sensors. Then there's one with two gloves, 3D acceleration sensors, where you have two bodies, and one person uses his right hand and the other one uses his left hand, and they're connected into a single macro body, and they have to fly through a parametric space, but they have to collaborate in order to fly this plane in collaboration. It's all based on collaborative kind of thing, and it's all audiovisual. So there's part visuals and there is sound. And some new robotic work also. Large-scale drawings, very big drawings. And always, the question is always what to do and what not to do. And yeah.
So do you publish your algorithm?
Yes, oh yes. I've written a lot, published a lot of papers on my work, yeah. You can check it out online. You can find a lot of papers on Cellular Automata, for instance, on interaction. Yeah.
Open source?
My algorithms. No, the programs, I do not publish my programs. I write about my work in my programs, but the programs themselves are not really available in the public domain at all. I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Sometimes abstract flowcharts are published, so you can get the idea. Yeah.
What is the final motivation? Is it aesthetic, or is it intellectual?
Well, that same question there was Barry Gibb. Same question was I just heard it the other day. I was traveling. Yesterday I was in Tel Aviv, and there was on TV. There was said, well, what is your motivation? And Barry Gibb said ambition, and it was quite neat to say that ambition. Why not? But of course, ambition is not the whole story. I think it's curiosity. Is important in curiosity, in discovery, and activity, and the notion of having developing a vehicle to explore yourself, like having an instrumental device to probe who you are. I think that's important. And of course, as I said, there are many. In fact, there's an infinite number of dimensions, and most of who we are is subconscious anyway. So. It's also about being connected into a larger whole, I think, of what it means to be an artist in society, I think, today, and relating to history, recent history and remote history, and where you are at that spot in, multidimensional space, I would say, in space and time, but it's, of course, more global than that.
Any other question? Peter, maybe I have one question.
Sure.
In what kind of environment did you work when you started, and from the beginning and up to now? Were you invited in research laboratory? Where were you? Where did you do all this? Because I suppose at the very beginning you didn't have a home computer. So where were you working, and how?
Well, it started with electronic music. I was working in studios and building instruments, and then gradually I got interested in computing and worked at Hybrid Computation Center of Ghent University. Then I moved to London, worked at the Slade School of Art for a couple of years. And then I started moving a lot. And, at the time, one had to find a computer. Today, the computer is everywhere. But at the time, it was difficult, and it was not easy to convince the director of, say, a university academic computer center to let me have access to the infrastructure. But anyway, I managed from time to time to have access. Like in the Hybrid Computation Center of Ghent University, I worked during the night, 9 in the evening till 4 in the morning, before I moved to London. Yeah. And then let me see, there was the Apple II that came along. That was quite a revolution, because you had a computer on your desk, which was really a revolution, Being able to touch the computer 24 hours a day was something very big. Well, what's a pioneer? I don't know. There's a lot of potential if you consider today the computational power in a simple laptop, and so for that reason, if you consider the infrastructure, the computational power that used to be available, like. In the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s, and at that point, these academic structures actually provided access to computational power. Well, at the moment, the function of such academic and educational structures actually changed fundamentally, in the sense that there is more like a social function these structures have, because it's about society today is about sharing knowledge and intentions and collaboration, and I think that is the and again. One other apparent feature of contemporary culture. It was in the US, we call this make culture, in the sense that people want to create things again. They create with their hands and with their bodies. And like the new digital is analog, as Sigraf used to say a couple of 2-3 years ago, in the sense that there's a lot going on. Like, look at Arduino, wiring and Arduino, and also the availability of open source software like processing and so on. You know, the meaning and significance of processing as an instrumental thing to program is only you know, the social significance of processing extends way beyond the computational flexibility of it as a program, because it connects people around the world into this kind of global social structure having to do with computational aesthetics, which is wonderful.
Which came first, the interest in technical things or the interest in art?
It was a big question. It was a question, and I didn't know what to do. And at a certain point, when I was like 15 or 16, someone showed me a radio tube. You know, at the time, before transistors and chips, there were radio lamps, tubes, as they call it. And a tube like that, it had what is called a filament, a tiny kind of glowing kind of thing. And it kind of fascinated me. And I was fascinated by that, and I said, well, and in the end that I was trying to get access to amateur. Call this a hobby radio amateur, because I thought it was fascinating to talk to people, you know, all over the world, and in having a transmitter and a receiver and so on. And in the end, I ended up studying electronics. And once I got my degree, the day actually I got my degree, I enrolled at the conservatory in Brussels here. I wanted to study music and music history.
But you were also drawing all the time.
I was drawing all the time. As a child, I was drawing, and I'm still drawing a lot today, because I think drawing is like sketching and drawing and developing ideas. I draw a lot in order to think, because who was it? Drawing is a thinking machine. It's an idea I developed with Elena, who is there, Elena the Priester, who contributed a chapter to my book. We developed this idea of drawing as a thinking machine. And I think it really is, because if you actually with some of the older programs, because I wanted it to create a confrontation between my approach to composition and performance, which is very strongly rooted in Western culture, and in particular in jazz and free improvisation, so on. So I wanted to open it up to other world cultures, but it's not easy and not a trivial thing to do. I did some experiments with people in Japan, in the US, yeah, but not much, yeah. But there's still a lot to do. I mean, in terms of interaction, in human-machine interaction, we're still scratching the surface of what is possible. I think there's still a lot to do, really a lot of exciting research to be done, yeah.
Well, if there's no more questions, then we can continue the conversation to the bar, or freely everywhere. Huh?
Another question?
Practical application of your concepts?
Serious programming.
No, I mean for industry or commercial or whatever.
At the moment, I'm not really interested in that, but I have some domains in some programming for computer-aided architectural design,
Yeah.
long time ago.
But you don't
Even some
like,
typeface design,
Yeah.
typeface design. Yeah,
It's something you
long
don't
time ago.
like.
No, I don't have time to do that at the
Yeah.
moment. And no, it's no, I'm a full-time researcher at the moment, and I teach also in addition to that. And so
Yeah.
I don't have really time to. I'm not really interested either for the moment.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.